Welcome to my channel. Today, we dive into the dark and mysterious side of the Appalachian Trail. This 2,190-mile path hides chilling secrets and eerie legends. Beware of ghost stories, disappearances, and murders that haunt this trail. Every step is a journey into the unknown, where danger and ghostly encounters await. If you enjoyed this taste of terror, share your creepiest thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more spine-tingling stories. The abandoned campsite. The Appalachian Trail was 2,190 miles of rugged beauty, winding through 14 states, from Georgia to Maine. It was the perfect escape for Mike, Sarah, Jenna, and Tom, 4 friends seeking a break from their everyday lives. They'd planned this trip for months, eager to disconnect and immerse themselves in nature. Mid-autumn cast the trail in vibrant hues of red, orange, and yellow. The air was crisp, the kind that made you feel alive with every breath. They'd already hiked for a day and a half, spirits high and conversation light, when they stumbled upon an old campsite. "Hey, check this out," Mike called, pointing to a ring of stones that had once been a fire pit. Rusted remnants of a tent lay nearby, along with a few scattered pieces of gear. Most curious was a weathered journal, its pages yellowed and brittle. Mike picked it up, flipping through the entries. "Looks like someone left rushing." Sarah brushed off a chill. "Maybe they just moved on and forgot it." Jenna laughed. "Or they got tired of lugging around a bunch of old junk." Tom, ever the skeptic, grinned. "Or they wanted to scare future hikers. Look at this." He pointed to a tree, where the words "stay away from the shadows" were carved deep into the bark. They all laughed, attributing the ominous warning to an overactive imagination or a practical joker. Mike slipped the journal into his backpack, a curious souvenir to ponder over later. As they continued their hike, the forest seemed to close in around them. Shadows lengthened and moved with an eerie fluidity, and whispers seemed to float on the breeze. Sarah couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. "Guys, do you feel that?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Tom shrugged. "It's just the wind in the trees. Don't let that stupid carving freak you out." But the unease was infectious. That night, gathered around their campfire, Mike pulled out the journal. "Want to hear some creepy campfire stories?" he joked. But his tone held a nervous edge. He read aloud, recounting the entries of a hiker who'd written about feeling pursued by something in the shadows. The descriptions were unsettlingly detailed. Whispers in the dark, shapes moving just out of sight, a sense of growing madness. Sarah's face paled. "That sounds exactly like what's been happening to us." "Come on, it's just a story," Jenna said, though she sounded unsure. "Someone probably made it up." The firelight flickered, casting long, twisting shadows. The forest seemed to press closer, the night alive with unseen eyes. As they settled into their tents, the sense of foreboding deepened. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig set their nerves on edge. Sleep came fitfully, if at all. Jenna awoke in the middle of the night to a chilling scream. She scrambled out of her tent, heart pounding. "Tom? Where's Tom?" Mike and Sarah emerged, flashlights cutting through the dark. Tom's tent was empty, his flashlight lying abandoned with its beam pointing into the dense forest. Panic set in as they called his name, their voices swallowed by the night. "He wouldn't just leave," Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. "Something's out there." The shadows seemed to thicken, encroaching on their small circle of light. Fear gnawed at them, turning the forest from a place of adventure to a realm of terror. Something was out there, lurking in the darkness, and it was closing in. The night was a living nightmare. Mike, Sarah, and Jenna huddled together, their flashlights flickering as they searched for any sign of Tom. Fear had etched itself onto their faces, each second stretching into an eternity. "We have to find him," Mike said, his voice breaking the silence. "We can't leave him out there." Sarah nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. "But what if whatever took him is still out there?" Jenna tightened her grip on her flashlight, her knuckles white. We stick together. We don't split up. They ventured deeper into the woods, every rustle of leaves and snap of a twig setting their nerves on edge. The shadows seemed to move with intent, stalking them. It was as if the forest itself had come alive with malevolent purpose. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the darkness. It was Tom, but his eyes were wide with terror, and he was covered in dirt and scratches. "Run!" he gasped, collapsing into Mike's arms. "It's coming." A chilling growl echoed through the trees. The friends spun around, their flashlights revealing a twisted, shadowy figure moving toward them. It was unlike anything they had ever seen, an embodiment of the darkness, its form shifting and insubstantial, yet undeniably menacing. Sarah's voice was a whisper. "What is that?" "No time to figure it out," Mike said, pulling Tom to his feet. "We need to move now." They stumbled through the forest, adrenaline propelling them forward. The shadow creature pursued, its growls growing louder, more insistent. The air grew colder, their breath visible in the flickering light. Jenna stumbled, and Mike quickly helped her up. "Keep going," he urged. "We're almost there." They burst into a small clearing, the moonlight offering a brief respite from the oppressive darkness. In the center stood the abandoned ranger station, its windows dark and foreboding. "Inside! Quickly!" Sarah shouted. They crashed through the door, slamming it shut behind them. The room was in disarray, papers scattered everywhere, as if someone had left rushing. But it was silent, save for their ragged breathing. "Barricade the door," Mike ordered. They piled furniture against the entrance, their hands shaking with fear. Tom slumped against the wall, his face pale. "It won't hold. It's too strong." Jenna knelt beside him, her voice soft. "We're safe for now. We just need to wait for dawn." But the shadows outside pressed against the windows, their malevolent presence palpable. Time dragged, each minute an agony of anticipation. The growls grew louder, more insistent, as if the creature knew its prey was within reach. As the first light of dawn began to filter through the cracks, the growling ceased. The shadows receded, the oppressive atmosphere lifting slightly. Mike looked at the others, their faces drawn and exhausted. "We need to get out of here, find help." They emerged cautiously, the morning light revealing a forest that looked almost normal, save for the lingering sense of dread. They made their way back to the trail, supporting Tom between them. The hike back was a blur, their minds haunted by the night's terror. When they finally reached civilization, they stumbled into a ranger station, disheveled and desperate. The ranger listened to their tale, his expression grave. "You're not the first to report something like this," he said. "There are legends about shadows in those woods. Most people don't believe them, but..." He trailed off, shaking his head. "I'll make sure the area is thoroughly checked." Mike, Sarah, Jenna, and Tom left the station, the weight of their experience pressing heavily on them. They never spoke of the details to anyone else, but the scars remained. The trail, once a symbol of freedom, had become a haunting reminder of the unseen horrors lurking just beyond the light. Even in the safety of their homes, they couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The shadows seemed deeper, the darkness more profound. They knew that some things once encountered could never truly be forgotten. Cryptic Codes. The Appalachian Trail is a wild, untamed stretch of land spanning over 2,190 miles through 14 states from Georgia to Maine. In early spring, the trail begins to buzz with the energy of hikers setting off on their northbound journeys. Among them is Sarah, a seasoned through hiker with a deep love for the outdoors. Joining her is a couple in their 30s, Mike and Lisa, excited but slightly apprehensive about the adventure ahead. Then there's the mysterious loner, always seen with his notebooks filled with computer codes and a faraway look in his eyes. The group first notices the loner one evening as they rest at a shelter. Sarah, stretching her tired muscles, spots him rummaging through his pack. A flash of green catches her eye. It's a stash of cash, a lot of it. Curiosity piqued, she watches him pull out more notebooks, each page densely filled with handwritten codes. Before she can ponder further, a blood-curdling scream pierces the air. The hikers jump to their feet, hearts racing. What was that? Lisa's voice trembles. Probably just an animal. Mike tries to reassure her, though his eyes dart nervously to the darkening woods. The group huddles closer together, deciding to move on at first light. They stick together for safety, but an uneasy feeling lingers. As they hike, strange occurrences begin to unfold. They find messages written in code on trees and rocks, unsettling in their cryptic nature. One morning, Lisa wakes up to find her shoes filled with dirt and twigs. Her face pales as she holds them up for the group to see. "Someone's messing with us," she says, voice shaky. Mike confronts the loner later that day, but the man denies any involvement. His eyes are wild with agitation. "I don't know what you're talking about," he snaps, clutching his notebooks tighter. "You're all part of it, aren't you?" Sarah suggests they keep an eye on him, but avoid confrontation. The group's nerves are frayed, each rustle of leaves and snap of a twig sending jolts of fear through their hearts. The once majestic and calming trail now feels oppressive, each step heavier with dread. One stormy night, they're forced to take shelter in an abandoned cabin off the trail. The wind howls outside and the rain beats against the roof. Inside, the tension is palpable. They hear footsteps circling the cabin, a soft, menacing crunch of leaves underfoot. "Did you hear that?" Sarah whispers, eyes wide with fear. Mike nods, gripping a makeshift weapon. Suddenly, the door bursts open and there stands the loner, his eyes wild and a knife clutched in his hand. The storm outside mirrors the chaos inside as he rants about the codes and being watched, convinced they are all part of a plot against him. "Stay back," Mike yells, trying to keep the group behind him. The loner's paranoia reaches a fever pitch as he lunges forward, eyes blazing with desperation. The group's ordeal has reached a critical point. The thin veneer of safety shattered, leaving them in a fight for their lives against an unpredictable threat. Mike's shout hangs in the air as the loner lunges, knife flashing in the dim light. Time seems to slow down. Sarah, heart pounding, grabs a heavy branch lying nearby. "Stop!" she yells, her voice cracking with fear and determination. The loner hesitates, eyes darting wildly between the group members. Mike steps forward, keeping his voice steady. "We're not against you. Just put the knife down and we can talk." The loner's hand trembles. "You don't understand," he whispers, tears glistening in his eyes. "They're after me. They're everywhere." Sarah inches closer, the branch ready in her hands. "We believe you, but we can help, okay? Just put the knife down." The storm rages on outside, the wind howling like a creature in pain. Inside, the tension is suffocating. Lisa clutches Mike's arm, her eyes never leaving the knife. The loner suddenly lets out a guttural scream, swinging the knife wildly. Mike rushes forward, tackling him to the ground. The knife skitters across the floor, unreachable. The two men grapple, their breath coming in ragged gasps. "Help him!" Sarah shouts, but the fear in Lisa's eyes roots her to the spot. Sarah drops the branch and dives in, pulling the loner off Mike. He struggles, but she holds firm. "Calm down!" she yells into his ear, using all her strength to keep him still. "We're not your enemies." The fight leaves the loner's body as he collapses and sobs. Mike, breathing heavily, picks up the knife and throws it into a corner. "We need to get him help," he says, looking at Sarah. "He's not well." The next morning, they manage to contact park rangers who come to take the loner into custody. As he's led away, he turns to Sarah, his eyes clear for the first time. "Thank you," he whispers. Back on the trail, the group is quieter, the weight of the night's events hanging over them. The once comfortable silence of the wilderness now feels charged with unseen dangers. As they hike, Mike and Lisa's relationship shows cracks of strain, their conversations short and tense. Sarah, usually confident and independent, finds herself haunted by the loner's wild eyes and desperate words. One evening, as they set up camp, Lisa speaks up. "What if he was right?" she says, her voice barely above a whisper. "What if there's something out here?" Mike shakes his head. "He was just sick, Lisa. That's all." But Sarah isn't so sure. She glances at the trees, shadows lengthening in the twilight. "We need to stay vigilant," she says quietly, "just in case." Their journey continues, but the trail no longer feels like a path of adventure. Each step is a reminder of the fragile line between sanity and madness, the thin barrier between safety and danger. They move forward, but the memory of the loner and his cryptic messages follows them, a dark shadow in the back of their minds. A Night to Survive. Rebecca White and Claudia Brenner were excited about their camping trip to Moshoe State Forest. It was May 1988, and the dense forest was alive with birdsong and the rustling of leaves. They relished the break from their daily routines, looking forward to a weekend of tranquility and togetherness. They had just arrived and were unloading their gear when Rebecca decided to make a quick trip to the public restroom nearby. As she walked back, she noticed a man standing by the entrance. He had an unsettling presence, with piercing eyes that seemed to look right through her. "Hey, can I bum a cigarette?" the man asked. Rebecca felt a shiver run down her spine. Trying to be polite, she handed him one. "Sure, no problem," she replied, then quickly made her way back to Claudia. "Everything okay?" Claudia asked, sensing her partner's unease. "Yeah, just some guy asking for a cigarette. Let's not worry about it," Rebecca said, forcing a smile. Later that day, as they stopped to look at their map, they saw the man again. He was standing a little too close, watching them. Claudia felt the hair on the back of her neck stand up. "That's the same guy from earlier," Rebecca whispered. "It's probably just a coincidence." Claudia nodded, but the sense of unease lingered. They continued on, trying to shake off the feeling. As night fell, they set up camp and settled in, the sounds of the forest enveloping them. Little did they know, Carr was lurking in the shadows, watching their every move. The serenity of the forest began to feel oppressive, the silence heavy with an unseen threat. They sat by the fire, talking about their plans for the next day, when suddenly they heard a rustle in the bushes. Both women froze, their eyes darting around in the dim light. "Did you hear that?" Claudia asked, her voice trembling. "Probably just an animal," Rebecca said, though her voice was not convincing. She got up and peered into the darkness but saw nothing. Unbeknownst to them, Carr was still there, his presence growing more sinister by the minute. The peaceful night now felt like a trap, the forest closing in around them with each passing second. As they tried to brush off their fears and get some rest, the unease lingered, casting a shadow over their campsite. The sense of dread was palpable, but they clung to the hope that it was all just their imagination. Little did they know, the horror was only beginning. A sudden crack shattered the quiet. Claudia bolted upright, heart pounding. "Did you hear that?" Rebecca nodded, fear in her eyes. "Stay here, I'll check." Rebecca stepped out cautiously, flashlight in hand. As she scanned the area, the beam of light revealed nothing but trees and shadows. She turned back to the tent, but then another crack, louder this time. She turned again, flashlight trembling. Out of the darkness, a figure emerged, Stephen Roy Carr. Before Rebecca could react, he raised a gun and fired. The crack of the gunshot echoed through the forest. Rebecca stumbled back, clutching her side. "Rebecca!" Claudia screamed, rushing out of the tent, only to be met with another shot. She felt a searing pain in her shoulder and fell to the ground. Carr fired again, the bullets whizzing past them. The horror of the attack was immediate, the realization of their vulnerability hitting like a cold wave. Rebecca, despite her pain, tried to pull Claudia to safety. "We have to move," Rebecca gasped, her voice strained with pain and fear. Claudia nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, her voice breaking. Don't apologize. Just stay with me," Rebecca urged, her grip tightening. They crawled towards the cover of the trees, but Carr's footsteps were closing in. He was relentless, his hate palpable. "You can't hide from me," he taunted. Claudia, fueled by desperation, found a burst of strength. "We have to fight back," she whispered. Rebecca nodded, wincing. "Grab a rock. Anything." Claudia found a large branch and gripped it tightly. As Carr approached, his shadow looming over them, Claudia swung with all her might. The branch connected with his arm, causing him to stagger back and drop the gun. Rebecca seized the moment, kicking the gun away. "Run!" she screamed, grabbing Claudia's hand. They bolted through the trees, adrenaline pushing them forward despite their injuries. Behind them, Carr cursed, struggling to regain his balance. They could hear him crashing through the underbrush, his anger driving him on. They reached a clearing, and in the distance, they saw headlights, a car approaching on a dirt road. With the last of their strength, they ran towards the light, waving frantically. The car screeched to a halt, and the driver jumped out, taking in the scene. "What happened? Help us! He's trying to kill us," Claudia cried. The driver quickly helped them into the car and sped off, leaving Carr behind in the darkness of the forest. 10 days later, Carr was arrested, his rampage brought to an end. The forest, once a place of peace, was now tainted by the memory of that night. Rebecca and Claudia's bond had been tested in the most horrific way, revealing a depth of resilience and love that nothing could break. Claudia, though scarred, channeled her pain into advocacy, becoming a leading voice against anti-gay violence. Rebecca's memory fueled her drive, ensuring that the tragedy had a lasting impact on the fight for justice and equality. The forest's dark chapter became a beacon for change, a testament to their unyielding spirit. Trail of Fear. Jake and Lisa were thrilled. They'd planned this hiking trip along the Appalachian Trail for months. Stretching from Georgia to Maine, the trail was renowned for its breathtaking views and peaceful solitude. They were eager to escape the hustle and bustle of their daily lives. "Are you sure about this section?" Lisa asked as they packed their gear at the trailhead. "Positive," Jake replied with a grin. "It's supposed to be one of the most beautiful parts." As they were about to set off, a weathered old man approached them. His skin was like leather from years in the sun, and his eyes had a haunted look. "You all be careful out there," he warned, his voice gravelly. "This part of the trail's got a history. Folks say it's haunted." Jake chuckled. "We'll be fine. We're not scared of ghosts." Old Man Roy shook his head. "Suit yourselves. Just remember, sometimes it's better to be safe than sorry." Lisa felt a chill but brushed it off. They started their hike, enjoying the crisp air and the sound of leaves crunching underfoot. The first few days were perfect, just them and nature, with no one else in sight. They set up camp each night, cooking over a small fire and sharing stories. On the third night, as they settled into their tent, they heard it, a faint whispering, almost indistinguishable from the wind. Lisa sat up, her heart pounding. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. Jake listened. "It's just the wind, babe. Go back to sleep." But Lisa couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The next day, they found strange symbols carved into the trees, circles and lines that made no sense. "Probably just some pranksters," Jake said, trying to sound confident. But Lisa noticed he was more vigilant, scanning the woods as they hiked. By the 5th day, the feeling of being watched was overwhelming. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig made them jumpy. That evening, they stumbled upon an abandoned campsite. The tent was in tatters, and scattered around were belongings left behind quickly. Lisa found a journal half buried in the dirt. She read the last entry aloud, her voice trembling. Hearing whispers at night. Feel like we're being watched. It's here. Jake looked around nervously. We should move on. Maybe find a different spot to camp. That night, the whispers returned, louder and clearer. It wasn't just the wind. It was voices, murmuring indistinctly. Lisa clung to Jake, fear gripping her heart. What if the old man was right? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Jake didn't answer. He just held her tighter, staring into the darkness beyond the tent, knowing that their adventure had turned into something far more sinister than they'd ever imagined. Lisa jolted awake, the tent feeling strangely empty. Jake, she whispered, but there was no answer. Panic set in as she realized he was gone. She scrambled out of the tent, flashlight in hand. Jake, she called into the dark forest. His voice answered, but it sounded distant, unnatural. Over here, Lisa Ty. She followed the voice, every step filled with dread. The trees seemed to close in around her, their branches like skeletal hands reaching out. She finally found Jake standing in a clearing, staring blankly ahead. Jake, what's wrong? She asked, shaking him. He didn't respond, just pointed into the shadows. The ghost emerged, a woman with hollow eyes and a flowing white dress that seemed to shimmer in the moonlight. The air grew icy, and Lisa felt an overwhelming sense of sorrow and fear. Why are you here? Lisa demanded, her voice trembling. The ghost's voice was a whisper on the wind. He is mine now. No, Lisa shouted, pulling Jake away. His eyes flickered with recognition and fear. Run, Lisa, he managed to say. They stumbled back through the forest, but the ghost followed, her presence a cold, relentless shadow. They made it back to their tent and hurriedly packed their things, but the whispers grew louder, more insistent. We have to go now, Jake said, his voice shaking. They hiked through the night, driven by sheer terror. The ghost was always just behind them, a chilling presence they couldn't shake. As dawn approached, they reached the trailhead where Old Man Roy had warned them. Exhausted, they collapsed. But the whispers finally ceased. They were safe for now. Days later, back in the comfort of their home, the experience haunted them. Lisa had nightmares of the ghost's hollow eyes, and Jake couldn't stop researching the trail's dark history. He discovered countless stories of hikers who had heard the whispers and seen the ghost. The trip that was supposed to be a beautiful adventure had left them with scars they couldn't see but felt deeply. The Appalachian Trail, once a symbol of freedom and beauty, was now a haunting memory. Appalachian Nightmare. It was a perfect autumn morning on September 13th, 1990. The Appalachian Trail, known for its breathtaking scenery, was alive with the vibrant hues of fall. Molly LaRue and Geoff Hood, both avid hikers in their mid-20s, were making their way to the Thelma Marks shelter on Cove Mountain, near Duncannon, Pennsylvania. They had met through a youth outreach program and shared a passion for the outdoors, using their hikes as a way to connect with troubled kids and help them find peace in nature. We should be there by nightfall, Jeff said, adjusting his pack. Molly smiled, her eyes twinkling with excitement. I can't wait to see the view from up there. As the sun dipped below the horizon, they reached the shelter, a modest wooden structure offering refuge for hikers. They set up their camp, the evening air filled with their laughter and the comforting sounds of the forest. They were completely unaware that they were being watched. Paul David Cruz, a man with a troubled past and dark intentions, lurked in the shadows. His presence was a stark contrast to the peaceful surroundings, an omen of the horror to come. He had been following the couple, biding his time. Night fell, and the forest grew silent. Molly and Jeff were preparing their dinner, their conversation light and easy. "This is my favorite part of the day," Molly said, stirring the pot. Just us, the stars, and the trail. Suddenly, a rustle in the bushes nearby caught Jeff's attention. "Did you hear that?" he asked, his voice tense. Molly glanced up, her smile fading. "Probably just an animal," she replied, though there was a hint of uncertainty in her voice. Before they could react, Cruz emerged from the darkness, a sinister figure armed and dangerous. "Don't move," he growled, aiming his gun at them. Jeff instinctively stepped in front of Molly, his protective instinct kicking in. "What do you want?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Cruz's eyes were wild, filled with a disturbing mix of rage and madness. "Shut up," he snarled, firing 3 shots into Jeff's chest. Molly screamed as Jeff fell to the ground, lifeless. Her heart pounded in her chest as Cruz turned his attention to her. He tied her up with rough, calloused hands, ignoring her pleas for mercy. The terror in her eyes seemed to fuel his madness. "Please, don't do this," she begged, tears streaming down her face. But Cruz was beyond reason. The forest, once a sanctuary, now echoed with Molly's cries as Cruz assaulted her. Each moment was a twisted nightmare, the serene beauty of the Appalachian Trail shattered by his brutality. The horror was far from over as Cruz's intentions grew even darker, his violence escalating with every passing second. Molly's world had collapsed into a relentless, suffocating nightmare. Every breath felt like a struggle, every second a battle to stay conscious. Paul David Cruz's rage seemed unending, his eyes devoid of any humanity. But deep within her, Molly clung to a fragile thread of hope, a desperate need to survive. As Cruz rummaged through their belongings, Molly's mind raced. She had to do something, anything, to break free. The ropes cut into her wrists, but she twisted and pulled, the pain a distant echo compared to her overwhelming fear. Cruz's attention was diverted as he rifled through Jeff's pack, his back turned to her. Molly seized the moment. With a surge of adrenaline, she wriggled her hands free, ignoring the blood trickling from her wounds. She quietly reached for a nearby rock, her heart pounding in her ears. Cruz turned just as Molly swung the rock with all her might, catching him on the side of the head. He stumbled, a look of shock and fury contorting his face. Molly scrambled to her feet, her body trembling with a mix of fear and determination. "You think you can escape?" Cruz hissed, recovering quickly, his eyes burning with anger. He lunged at her, but Molly was already moving, driven by pure survival instinct. She darted into the forest, the darkness her only ally. Branches scratched at her skin as she ran, each step fueled by the memory of Jeff's lifeless body and the horrors she had endured. She could hear Cruz crashing through the underbrush behind her, his curses filling the air. Suddenly, the forest opened up to a small clearing, the moonlight casting eerie shadows on the ground. Molly's breath came in ragged gasps as she looked around, desperately searching for something to defend herself. Her eyes landed on a broken branch, sharp and jagged. She grabbed it, turning to face her pursuer. Cruz burst into the clearing, his face twisted with rage. "You can't hide from me, Molly," he snarled, advancing slowly. "This is where it ends." "No," Molly replied, her voice trembling but resolute. "This is where you pay for what you've done." Cruz lunged at her, but Molly was ready. She dodged to the side and thrust the branch forward, the sharp end piercing his side. He let out a guttural scream, staggering back, clutching the wound. For a moment, everything was still. The forest held its breath as Cruz dropped to his knees, his strength ebbing away. Molly stood over him, her body shaking, tears streaming down her face. She had done it. She had survived. 8 days later, the police finally caught up with Cruz, who had managed to stumble away from the clearing, weakened and delirious. He was found carrying items stolen from Molly and Geoff, along with the weapons used in the murders. His capture brought a small measure of relief, but the scars left by that night would never fully heal. Molly returned to the trail once more, not to hike, but to remember Jeff and to honor the love they had shared. The Appalachian Trail, once a place of peace, now holds a darker significance, a reminder of the fragility of safety and the resilience of the human spirit.